Did you know that it wasn't until the 1990s that marital rape entered the field? Before that, let's say like the Christian marriage has been around for like 1,700 years, almost 2,000 years. Think about that. It wasn't until the 1990s that marital rape became a thing. You know what that means? That means before then, some folks saw rape equivalent to being obedient to God. Think about that. Doesn't that make sense? That's what people believed was God approved, perhaps even God commanded. I think that's a really important thing to zero in on, because it's uncomfortable and sometimes it's frightening, and it's unnerving. For some of us, hearing that hits too close to home. But I think this is a very important starting point for us to think about. To me, this brings up the teaching distinctions between a God of conquest and a God of communion. A God of conquest it's the idea that, we do this, in the name of God, because God has promised this to us, like manifest destiny. It's like the entitlement that God has spoken. There's that. That's the conquest of God. The communion of God is the actual experience of God. You're actually experiencing it. It's the experience of two sides becoming one, or experiencing union. It's heaven on earth. That's communion. So there's a God of conquest and there's a God of communion. You see? So the God of conquest is the same type of concept where, like, oh, we're married, now we can have sex. Let's have sex. You say, no, I still take you. Or it's just like this entitlement. Now, when that happens, you don't really have a chance to learn or cultivate desire, or how to be present with one another, and we don't have a chance to learn the loops that we replay in our projections. All that's erased because there's a sense of entitlement. I think the same thing is happening here. What's happening currently in current events, the political scape, the spiritual scape. There is an understanding that God is a God of conquest, of entitlements. But there's also a God of communion, and the God of communion is the real deal. It is when two opposite sides learn to love one another without erasing one another. It's not about one being right and wrong. It's seeing that there needs to be a line through which we love. Where is the love if we have no lines? So let's make this clear. This concept of a God of conquest, it's not God. What happens when you think about a God of conquest? It's like, the same thing that happened when manifest destiny, it's the spread of Christianity ends up erasing and burning up the history of what existed there before. It's like an erasure of story. And it's, in those circumstances, it's the enforcement of marriage. Even if it's a culture that doesn't think the same. It's like before, did you know, like before the whole conquest narrative came around? Before Christianity, all the creation stories of the world, they all pretty much started off with a woman or with sexuality, like man and woman. So in those spiritual narratives were the wisdom of how to cultivate connection. Now, in a monotheistic, patriarchal worldview, all we have is God is man. That's it. And then we have a virgin mother, and then we have a virgin Jesus. And so we have no examples of how to cultivate connection. So this is a big, important missing piece, isn't it? It sure is. That's why a teaching distinction of an erotic Christ is very important, because without it, we have no barometer. We have no example of what spiritual sexuality should be. Otherwise, we think it's rape. Why wouldn't we think it's rape? There's no other example. Well, that just sounds silly not to have an example. Obviously, we need an example. So when we do consider, let's say we consider Christ as an example. I mean, that would be the best example, right? So just consider, take a moment, let's just play make-believe here. Let's play make-believe. What if Christ was sexual? Let's not say this is heresy yet. Let's just kind of brainstorm here, because Christ is as a code. Christ is a walking parable of paradox. Christ is the transfigurative axis of paradoxical opposites. Like the first shall be last. The death is risen. Those who are poor who are rich. It's this constant paradox, this teaching paradox, and it's when you see the opposite that you start to experience the wisdom. It's like, oh, there's more perspective here. This is the point of the erotic Christ. Think about it. If we have a virgin Christ now, let's just think of the paradoxical opposite. Let's say there is a erotic Christ. Now let's allow that to expand the conversation. If we have an erotic Christ, we have an example through the love that Christ models of a proper way to be intimate and cultivate communion. You see, I think if we entertain that dialogue, I think there'll be less rape in these marriages. And I think if we start to see the importance of dignifying the other in that space of intimate connection, I think we'll see some similar things of how this relates to people with different ideas than we do, or people of the opposite political perspective. We'll learn to cultivate communion, how to coexist with one another, and still let differences be reasons for our closeness. It should not result to the erasure of the other. That is conquest. That is not communion. So as I describe these things, I hope you're getting a resonance, you're getting a feeling from me, and that maybe this helps broaden the perspective for you and allows you to feel into these things differently. You know what's really cool about Christ being a walking parable, the paradoxes? Think about it. If you look at the Holy Bible, you take out the Old Testament and you take out the stuff in the New Testament that's not the Gospels, and then you just only focus on the teachings of Christ, what you'll have is basically a book of parable of paradoxes, a book of wisdom. In fact, structurally, it reads just like the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is an Eastern book of wisdom. It's a bunch of parables. The Tao Te Ching is known as the Way. Christ is also known as the Way. In fact, between the ages of 12 and 30, folks have many different perspectives on what Christ did. I believe Christ headed east, because the last time he was around, he was 12 years old. He was trying to learn about some stuff from some teachers. And so I think when he left, I think he just went to learn some more. And where did he go? I think he was inspired by the 3 gifts he was left, by the 3 wise men from the east: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That's why I think Christ went east. And around that same time frame is when the Tao Te Ching was written, the Way. Is it so crazy to think that east and west of spirituality has a common thread there? Ooh. Do you realize how neighborly that makes us with others? The wisdom of Christ is a parable of paradoxes. the transfigurative axis of paradoxical opposites. So when we are facing anyone of a different perspective than us, a different sort than us, Christ's love is seeing the Christ in the other. That was from Richard Rohr. He's a friend. He's a priest. Some mystical Catholic wisdom there. So Christ transfigures, like basically both sides become different. Not only do they become different, they become new. It's like a chemical fire, like you burn wood and then it changes to like charcoal or ash and then it can't go back. It's a new creation. Same thing. Like when you experience the transfigurative love of Christ, you become new. It's like before and after making love for the first time. A signal of embodied communion versus disembodied conquest in a holy way. Anyway, I'm going to cut off this transmission now, but I wanted to feed you guys a signal here because we need it. It opens up opportunities for us to love one another and ourselves. The distinction of erotic Christ makes us confront our erotic selves. And basically, like the transfigurative axis of paradoxical opposites, those opposites, they reconcile. There's space for both now. Now you have more perspective, right? The world gets bigger. 3D, 5D. All right, love you guys.